Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings, everybody. It's Hugh Hewitt. Coming up this hour, Bill Bennett will be joining me at the bottom of the hour. Dr. Bill back in the house. John Birch, former Solicitor General of Michigan. He argued a case before the United States Supreme Court 2 weeks ago. But I begin with Eliana Johnson, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. You can follow her at Eliana Y. Johnson. Good morning, Eliana. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm great.
Now, I've got a couple of great questions for you. First of all, the G7 is not going to Doral, and therefore they're talking about Camp David, which is the worst political idea I've heard in about 20 years because there's nothing to be gained by that. But I think if they sent it to Detroit, Cleveland, or Phoenix, even though it's hot in Phoenix in June, maybe even the Twin Cities, if the president's making a play for it, it helps him politically. Is there political upside, in your view, in where they put the G7?
You know, it's an interesting idea, and I don't know that they've ever thought about doing, the global events that way. But I think it's an interesting idea.
And so, if you were going to do it that way, if you were just putting on your political antenna, which city in Phoenix they've got Martha McSally in a tough race, in Arizona allegedly turning purple. But Doug Ducey, a great governor, and Trumponomics have worked down there. In Detroit, you've got a state where he won by 12,000. In Minnesota, you got a state, the Twin Cities. Boy, it would be great in the Twin Cities. They'd put on a great show. They could use the fairgrounds, don't you know?
They could use the fairgrounds. I question how much the world leaders would enjoy sitting out at the state fair, but.
But the Lake Minnetonka, that's a great place to entertain people. And the Twin Cities, they could go out to Fort Snelling and do some reenactment.
I'm sure they would love that, yes.
Cleveland,
yes.
The Rock and Roll Hall of, but I don't actually think, and correct me if you think I'm crazy, I don't think they're political
you put out some ideas that would have them pining for Doral.
but I don't think they have a political operation at the White House equal to the challenge. I don't know them. But it just seems to me that they don't think in these terms in the way that the Bush White House, the Clinton White House, the Obama White House, everything was connected to reelect. Do you think the Trump White House thinks that way?
Well, Hugh, I think they may have some bigger fish to fry with impeachment right now. But I think you're right. I think ultimately, there aren't many people in the White House who are directing these things, because really it's the president who's making these calls. It's the president who said he wanted it at Doral, and then it was the president's decision to pull it back.
Right. And by the way, 11 minutes ago, the president tweeted 95% approval rating in the Republican Party. Thank you. I believe that's true. I think it's absolutely 100% true, because the divide in the country is shirts and skins. You're either on one team or you're on the other team. There isn't really a center that goes back and forth anymore.
I think that's right, and I do think it's one of the unfortunate things, and I think a lot of the president's support is that Republicans feel he's got the right enemies. It's less support of him, his policies, him personally, but I think it's opposition to his opponents.
I do not get mad at Democrats. I don't. It's just they do what they do. I was, however, shocked when the Speaker of the House, who is a constitutionally elected officer, stands up and accuses the president of treason. Because that's what that is. All roads with you run to Putin. Isn't that an accusation of treason?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what we've seen is Trump himself, doesn't modulate his language. He uses hyperbolic terms. And I think we've seen Democrats increasingly do the same. Pelosi certainly isn't the first Democrat to do that, and we've seen Trump's Republican challengers accuse him of treason as well.
But for a long period of time, Eliana, and you're too young for this, the charge of McCarthyism was toxic. No one wanted to be Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy is best known for illegitimate accusations of Soviet control. That's his bottom line McCarthyism. It goes back to the Red Scare of the 20s. Now we've got Hillary Clinton saying Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian agent. We've got the Speaker of the House accusing the president of being a Russian agent. What happened to the prohibition that we learned in the 50s about McCarthyism?
Yeah, what I don't think Democrats have learned from the release of the Mueller report, which turned out to be it didn't really substantiate, I think, in the public mind, all of the accusations they were making were that I think these charges do sort of ring hollow. If you read the Mueller report closely, it does talk about a Russian influence campaign, but I don't think that most Americans were following it that closely, and so I do think the charges ring hollow to most people who are following politics at a superficial level.
Now, I follow politics as you do at a micro level, and so I have
Right.
noticed one thing, which is that there is an attempted delegitimization of the Barr-Durham investigation underway, particularly as it relates to John Brennan, the former director of the CIA. Your old stomping grounds, Politico, has a long piece today about how poor John Brennan is being targeted. I see this everywhere, in fact. I see it online. I see it in papers. Is this an effort, a conscious effort by Team Obama to try and take out Durham before he even puts pen to paper?
Yeah, I do think you're absolutely right about this. I heard you talking to Senator Cotton about this. There's an effort to conflate the Barr-Durham investigation with the Rudy Ukraine,
Yes.
crazy stuff that was going on, and to tie them together. And I think there's also been an effort to delegitimize Bill Barr, who is actually, I would say one of the few competent cabinet officials and one of the few competent Trump allies. And I think once Democrats saw that, there were efforts to delegitimize him from the beginning. And so I think that's absolutely right. There's efforts to tie these two things together and to say that they're one and the same. And that's of course not true.
Yeah, if you think of a baseball team, a cabinet being a baseball team, Bill Barr and Mike Pompeo are batting 4 and 5. They're your cleanup hitters, and they're the ones you send out to win ball games. I am curious about DHS because this is so crucial to the president's reelection. I want him to nominate Jim Talent because he's so good on TV and he can explain this deeply evangelical. He'll explain that we're not anti-immigrant, but that you've got, he would just be a good explainer. But the president doesn't seem to think in those terms when it comes to DHS. We've had a series of people nominated, thought about, whatever, nice people, but none of them have the comm skills that you need for that job.
No, the president thinks in terms of people who can play roles, and I do think, I'm afraid of sort of saying the unsayable, but I think when the president, looks at somebody like Jim Talent, he sees, a guy who is, doesn't fit the role he thinks of, so he thinks DOD, he wants a general. He thinks Secretary of State, he thinks of a Rex Tillerson. That didn't work out so well. But I think a Talent doesn't fit the mental image of what the president has for a Homeland Security Secretary, and it's something that's really hurt him when he's filling these cabinet positions.
Well, yeah, because he's quieter, and the president likes brawling. But what happens is on TV...
he likes that for particular positions.
Yeah. And on DHS, he thinks he needs a brawler. He doesn't. He needs a persuader. He needs someone to go in and explain what an open border is doing to the country. He needs someone to know the statistic. He needs smart, Eliana. And what we identified with Pompeo and Barr, they're both big brains.
Right. I think that's absolutely right, and particularly on immigration, I think you're right. The president does need a persuader, as opposed to a Ken Cuccinelli, who's a brawler, and who I think it would be damaging to the president to have in that role.
I agree. So now, impeachment, endgame. They're going to vote an article. It's not Matt Lewis, a guy I esteem greatly, says this is an impeachable event. It isn't. It's not even remotely close to being a removable offense. But I don't think Matt represents more than a tiny sliver of the Republican Party, and therefore I think maybe he'll lose one or two senators. He might lose Murkowski. He will definitely lose Mitt Romney, but we know that. We're pricing that in. No way he gets removed, right?
Well, I don't think we know what all of the evidence is yet. But I think it's very unlikely the president gets removed for the following reason. It's not because of the evidence. I think if Republicans voted to remove the president, it would be an absolute death sentence for Republican electoral prospects in 2020. And I think that is ultimately the reason that they will not vote to remove him. Impeachment is a political process. I don't totally agree with you, like that. that there is behavior that's impeachable or not impeachable. I think it's political. So the Democrats can decide what's impeachable and not impeachable, and Republicans can decide that as well. But I think that's why Republicans will not vote to remove him. They don't want Mike Pence atop the ticket. He would be a weaker candidate than Trump.
And but Eliana, I'm going to just add, a lot of us look at that phone call transcript and say, this is what's been going on since the Peloponnesian War. Charles Hill, your old Yale professor, would say, that's what's been going on since the beginning of recorded history. Eliana Y. Johnson on Twitter, the editor of the Washington Free Beacon. Thank you, Eliana. Don't go anywhere, America. Coming right back. Bill Bennett at the bottom of the hour. Stay tuned.